And that album's available on the 5th of April.
Now, before Christmas, we played a track from an album by Mick Karn, sometimes springy bassist with Japan, and now leader of a group which includes two of his old partners in Panstick, keyboard player Richard Barbieri and drummer Steve Jansen, as well as the American guitarist David Torn. Much as I liked Karn's Bestial Cluster album, I think the session he recorded for mixing it actually sounds better, possibly because the band spent so much time together touring and playing live in the months before we invited them into the BBC's Maida Vale studio. This is the new and I reckon improved version of the album's title track, Bestial Cluster. Oh, hot stuff. That's the Mick Karn Band with Bestial Cluster, and there'll be two more tracks and an interview with Mick Karn later in the show. Now, while his band was setting up for the session, I collared Mick Karn and asked him how different the music he plays now is from the material he's best known for, that stylish, inscrutably kitsch oriental rock played by his first band, Japan.
Well, there's a wealth of difference. I mean, I've given a lot of thought to this because I've made 3 albums, but there's been big gaps in between each album, and I think the main difference is that when you're younger you tend to feel that you have to get all the material out on record because one day it's going to dry up, you're going to run out of inspiration or whatever it is. As you get older, you approach it in a much calmer way. You know there's going to be another album. It's just a case of what it's going to be like, which direction to take. So it's different for me because it comes from a much more confident standpoint, and it also comes from a point of view that the past is so long ago now, the Japan work, that it really feels like a completely different entity. I don't feel as if I have to prove anything to anyone anymore.
What sorts of music have you been getting into in the last 10 years? I mean, there's what I've heard from your album, there's a tremendous range of kind of musical reference in there. What sort of things have particularly engaged you?
I suppose I still mainly listen to ethnic music and classical music. I find it quite difficult to sit down and listen to an album, especially with vocals, because it draws you in. You have to pay more attention than maybe you'd like to. So I tend to have music playing in the background while I'm doing something else. So I've listened to a lot of that. I've got involved in jazz because, well, through David Torn, really. He kind of brought me into that circle.
How did you meet David Torn?
He approached me as a session player on his Cloud About Mercury album in 1986, I think that was. So we ended up doing a couple of tours together with various lineups. So it's just gone from that strength to strength, really. We're very similar in our thoughts about music.
How?
We both like to shatter people's illusions, really, break new ground and play the things that you're told for so much of your life that you're not supposed to play. You know, notes that don't go with other notes that actually appeal to us both very much.
And is this coming out of a sort of jazz influence?
It certainly is for David Torn, I think. For myself, to be completely honest with you, I don't listen to a lot of jazz. I find it quite intense, which goes against what I was saying about having it on in the background. So I don't particularly enjoy that. No, for me, I think it really comes from never having really learnt how to play the instrument, never really knowing what the note is I'm playing on the bass guitar. I still haven't sat down and learnt that, and I'm actually a little bit frightened to do so in case it changes the way I play.
You've got a very recognisable style, a style, in fact, that Mark, my co-presenter, and I discussed when we played a track from this album. And Mark was going on about how influenced he thought you'd been by Jaco Pastorius. Is that an influence you acknowledge?
That's very interesting. No, I wish I could give you a list of bass players that I've been influenced by, but to tell you the truth, when I started playing bass, there was nobody who really grabbed me as a bass player that I put the record on and tried to play along to. It was never like that. When Japan started receiving recognition, the English press started saying that I must go to bed with headphones on listening to Jaco Pastorius. So I decided from that point on that I would never listen to Jaco Pastorius. Now, after his death 3 years ago, the owner of CMP Records, who I'm with now, couldn't believe that I'd never actually heard him and bought me my first Jaco Pastorius CD. So now I can appreciate what an incredible bass player he was. But I wouldn't say he's been an influence.
Tell us about the pieces you're going to play for us tonight. How much have they been worked out? How much are they improvised? What are they?
They're all off the Bestial Cluster album. They were written in an improvisational way, I suppose. I mean, I used computer to write this album, which is something I've never done before. But I can only go up to a certain point because the instruments I play, you can't MIDI up to a computer. So I've tried to give as much freedom as I can to the actual musicians to translate what they hear from the computer into their own vocabulary, if you like. They're really experiments with rhythm. That's something that's very important. So I spent a lot of time choosing rhythms that I'd never really played with before, just to see how I would adapt them to my own style.